There are two kinds of people in the world. Those who love The Wire and those who haven't seen The Wire. And, it's funny, that really sums it up. The Wire, it's not your typical crime show. It's got this depth, it's almost philosophical, this look at life in Baltimore. But through all these lenses, the drug trade, law enforcement, politics, you name it, even the schools.
It really goes beyond just entertainment. It almost feels like, I don't know, a social experiment in a way, creating this world, but it's so realistic.
Yeah, and that world building is key. It's not just about the plot, it's how they build this believable version of Baltimore. The city becomes like another character.
One of the best ways they do that, I think, is by shifting our perspective. So, like, 1 minute we're with the cops, seeing how they try to handle this whole drug trade.
Right.
And then, boom, we're in the dealer's world. You start to understand them, what motivates them, their struggles, how they even have their own codes.
I think that's what hooked me. It's not just good guys versus bad guys. You really get into the systems, the institutions that shape everyone's lives. We see things from the politician's point of view, dock workers, teachers, even journalists. And you realize, wow, it's all connected.
And that's where it gets really brilliant. The Wire, it doesn't hold back. It criticizes these institutions, the ones that are supposed to be there for the people. Like, take the police. They're fighting this war on drugs.
Right.
But the show, it shows you how their methods, they often make things worse. The very problems they're trying to solve.
You see that parallel, too, between the police and the drug trade. They both work in similar ways. Hierarchies, codes, it's a constant fight for power. Makes you wonder, can you even win the war on drugs when the whole system is messed up?
It's like the game's rigged, like they say in the show. And that institutional failure, it's in every story. The politics, the compromises, it's all about the short-term wins. Nobody's looking at the big picture.
And you feel that in the characters' lives, too. Like D'Angelo Barksdale. He's Avon's nephew. He wants out, believes in the American dream and all that.
Right.
But the system, it just drags him back in.
That's powerful. It's tragic, because he shows you how little control you can have. When you're stuck in these big structures, you can't escape.
But then there's Omar Little.
Yeah.
Totally outside the system. Stick-up artist, yeah. But he's got his own code of ethics. And honestly, it sometimes seems more moral than the institutions he's fighting.
Yeah.
How do you even reconcile that?
Omar, he's just fascinating. Forces you to think about right and wrong. He's violent, but he's also incredibly loyal. Has a very strong sense of justice. He shows how morality can be complicated. It depends on the situation, the context.
It's like the show is saying there are no easy answers. No heroes or villains, really. Everyone's spangled up in this web. And their choices, good or bad, they ripple out. Affect the whole system.
And that's where that serial narrative format really shines. Over 5 seasons, it weaves all these seemingly separate stories together, these people from different walks of life. You start to see those connections, those echoes. It makes you think about the choices, the actions, and how they have consequences.
Like you said before about the shifting perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
We see how, what a drug kingpin does can impact a dock worker. A decision in a police station changes what happens in a classroom. It's all part of this bigger thing. The whole city of Baltimore, it's like a character in itself.
And speaking of the city, you can't talk about The Wire without the visuals. It's so unique, almost like a documentary, and it really makes that realism stronger.
Definitely. You feel like you're on the streets. You feel the grit, the tension. There's even beauty in it. Those long takes, the way they hold those shots of the city. You really get immersed.
It's not just what you see, it's how it makes you feel. Those little details, the empty chairs, the abandoned buildings, it's all conveying this feeling of loss, despair, the human cost of it all.
Those visual metaphors, you see them everywhere, and they stick with you. Like the show's asking you to look deeper, to see beyond the surface, to understand these characters.
Now, going back to those institutions, the police department is a good example. The Wire is saying they mean well, but they get bogged down in all the red tape. The politics, it's all about the stats. They don't deal with the real causes of crime.
Right. It's like they're playing this game where the rules reward them for arrests, convictions, even if those things don't fix the problems. The poverty, the lack of opportunity, that's what fuels the drug trade. How do you fix a system when the incentives are all wrong?
You see that frustration with the system play out in characters like McNulty. He's smart, he's dedicated, but he's always fighting the bureaucracy, the politics, that pressure to play the game a certain way, even if it means breaking the rules.
And that critique, it goes beyond the police too. It's the schools as well. Season 4 especially. Teachers like Mr. Presbolewski, they care about their students, but they're overwhelmed by a system that just fails these kids.
It's tragic because you see how he's a former cop, he comes in with all these ideas, this genuine desire to help. But he realizes, fast, he's fighting a losing battle. Too many kids in the classrooms, no resources, and what they're teaching, it doesn't connect to these kids' lives.
Makes you question the whole point of education. Is it really about preparing these kids for life? Or is it just this machine getting them ready to fail before they even have a chance?
And the thing is, The Wire doesn't give you easy answers. It's not afraid to show you how complicated these things are. It doesn't pretend there are simple solutions.
It leaves you feeling unsettled, maybe even pessimistic. But that's part of its power, right? It makes you face these hard truths about society, makes you understand that change, if it even comes, it's slow, messy, and really hard.
It's not a show that makes you feel good, that's for sure, but it makes you think. It challenges everything you thought you knew. And it stays with you long after you're done watching. And isn't that what great art is supposed to do?
I think so. Now, we talked about this moral ambiguity, and that's a big part of what makes The Wire so gripping. The characters are never just good or bad. They're people making choices. But the system is often against them.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those stories, because they really highlight the big themes of the show.
Absolutely. Who should we start with? Someone who embodies that grayness, that moral complexity.
Well, you can't talk about The Wire without talking about Omar Little. He's so unique, defies all your expectations of a crime drama.
He's a fan favorite for a reason. So, what makes Omar so compelling? How does his story challenge those traditional good versus evil ideas?
What gets me about Omar is that dedication he has to his own moral code. He robs drug dealers, but he won't hurt innocent people.
Right, he's got that line, all in the game, but it's more than just a saying.
It is. It shows you how he sees the world. He knows the rules, but he holds himself to a higher standard. He's almost like a vigilante, right? Dispensing his own kind of justice.
Yeah, he's been compared to Robin Hood, stealing from the rich, but with a shotgun. And then there's the fact that he's openly gay, in a world that's so focused on being tough.
It's another layer. He doesn't care about fitting in, doesn't compromise who he is, and that makes him even more powerful.
And they show his vulnerability too. He's capable of love. That relationship with Brandon, it reminds you that even in all that brutality, there's still room for tenderness, for connection.
And when Brandon dies, his reaction is just, you feel it. The grief, the anger, but also that determination. He wants justice.
Reminds you that these characters, even the ones outside the law, they have feelings. They're not just stereotypes. They're real people, complex motivations.
That complexity is what makes Omar so interesting. He's a criminal, but you can't help but admire his principles, his loyalty. He refuses to be defined by the game.
He's full of contradictions, like a force of nature. You're both scared of him and inspired by him at the same time. Now, speaking of complex characters, there's Detective McNulty. He's on the side of the law, right? But he's got his flaws. Often driven by his ego, that relentless pursuit of justice can lead him astray.
He embodies that struggle, wanting to do good, but stuck in a system that often cares more about protecting itself than actual justice. He's great at his job, a natural detective, but he's reckless, insubordinate, and willing to bend the rules. He's willing to bend the rules to get what he wants, and that gets him into trouble. Like in season 5, remember, he makes up that whole serial killer case just to get money for his unit.
Yeah, that was controversial. But it really shows you how blurry those lines can get. The moral ones, I mean.
Exactly. McNulty thinks he's doing the right thing, the ends justify the means and all that. But it makes you think about ethics, about the compromises we make for justice. It's not so simple.
And that moral grayness, it's in the politics too.
Yeah.
Like Mayor Garcetti starts off all idealistic, wants to make a real difference.
Yeah.
But then reality hits. The compromises, the deals, it takes its toll.
Garcetti's story is a reminder that even those at the top, they're caught in this web. So many different interests pulling at them. Doing the right thing, well, it's not always easy. Sometimes it's not even possible.
It's cynical, but it feels real. How politics works, not just in Baltimore, but everywhere. And it goes back to that idea, right? These systems, they're complex, they're all connected, and changing them, it's tough.
And speaking of those systems, The Wire doesn't just focus on the people inside them, it shows you how those systems themselves, they're often the problem.
You see it most clearly with the drug trade. It's not just about bad guys selling drugs. It's about everything that creates that world, the social and economic forces.
Right. Poverty, no opportunities, those institutions failing, it all leads to this cycle. Violence, despair. It's like the game is rigged, like they say.
They do say that a lot. And the show doesn't hide from how brutal it is. The violence, the addiction, the toll it takes on people. But you also see the human side. The resilience. The little moments of joy, even in the darkness. Characters like Wallace, D'Angelo, Body, they're not just statistics. They're people. With their own stories, their own hopes, their own tragedies.
And those individual stories, that's how The Wire delivers its message. It's not preaching, it just shows you these characters, these situations, makes you draw your own conclusions.
It's a show that makes you pay attention.
Yeah.
You have to feel empathy. You have to be willing to engage with those complex issues. And I think that's why it's had such an impact.
Absolutely. It challenges you, makes you question things. And it stays with you long after you've finished watching. It's more than just entertainment, it's an experience.
Well said. And speaking of experiences, I think we should look at how The Wire uses its structure to tell this story. It's so rich, it's layered, 5 seasons, weaving all these stories together, creating this huge tapestry. It's expansive, but it's also so detailed.
It's like this huge puzzle. Each episode gives you another piece, but you don't see the whole picture, the brilliance of it all, until you step back.
And the creators, David Simon and Ed Burns, they're so good at using those techniques, like contrast, resonance, connecting these pieces that seem so different. Like you might have a scene in the drug trade,
Right.
all gritty, detectives working a crime scene,
Mhm.
and then bam, you're at this fancy fundraiser for Mayor Garcetti.
Mhm.
It highlights those divides, the economic ones, the social ones. It's stark.
Exactly. And by putting those two worlds next to each other, The Wire makes you think about how they're connected. The decisions in one place affect what happens in the other.
It's that idea. Everything is connected. The Wire shows you that.
Hmm.
And the characters themselves, they're part of that. Their lives intersect, sometimes tragically, sometimes in ways that change everything.
Like Wallace, that young kid caught in the drug trade, his fate, it's a reminder of what this world costs in human terms.
Heartbreaking. But it also shows you that these characters, they're not just pawns, they're people. They have dreams, they have vulnerabilities.
Mhm.
And their choices, even the small ones, they have these ripple effects.
Those ripple effects, those connected stories, that's what makes The Wire so engaging. It's not just crime, it's about humanity, the systems we create, how they can both give us power and trap us.
And it doesn't pull any punches either. The show, it shows you the brutal reality of those systems.
And it doesn't offer any easy solutions.
And that's what makes it so thought-provoking, right? So challenging. It's about those uncomfortable truths, about our role in all of this.
Now, another key theme that runs through The Wire is this idea of moral ambiguity. The world isn't black and white, and the show understands that. The characters, you can't easily put them in a box, good or bad.
Like Stringer Bell, the ambitious one, right? Second in command of the Barksdale operation. On one hand, he's a ruthless criminal,
Yeah.
responsible for a lot of pain. But he also wants to go legit, improve things in his community. He takes those economics classes, goes to city council meetings, even tries to use his influence for good.
It makes you think about power, about wanting respectability. Can you redeem yourself after you've done those kinds of things?
And it goes back to that point, right? Things aren't simple. Even criminals can want to do good.
And the reverse, too. The ones who are supposed to be the good guys, like McNulty, they can make bad choices. Choices that make the problems worse.
It's complex. It makes you think. Challenges those ideas we have about good and evil. You have to look at the nuances.
And those nuances, they're in how the drug trade is shown, too. The Wire, it doesn't make it glamorous. It doesn't romanticize the violence. It's brutal. It's unflinching. This is what it does to people, families, whole communities.
You see it, the despair, the addiction, that feeling of hopelessness that hangs over everything. But there's also that resilience, the resourcefulness, those moments of joy, of connection, even in the dark.
And you see how the war on drugs, it hurts people, mass incarceration, families torn apart, all that wasted potential.
The message is clear. The war on drugs, how it's been fought, it's failed. It's caused more harm than good. It needs to change.
And that message is just as important now as when the show first came out.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about the schools. Season 4, it takes you inside those classrooms. You see those challenges. For the teachers, for the students, this system that's failing them.
It's sobering. It shows how that institutional failure, the lack of resources, how we as a society don't care enough, it all traps those kids, especially the ones from poor families. That cycle of poverty, it just keeps going.
You see those teachers, like Mr. Presbylewski. He's so dedicated, he really wants to help those kids. But the system is working against him.
Overcrowded classrooms, no support from the people at the top. The things they're teaching, it's just not relevant to these kids' lives. And all the bureaucracy, it's all about those tests, memorizing facts. There's no critical thinking, no room for creativity.
It crushes them, both the teachers and the students. And in the end, those kids aren't ready for the real world.
The show's take on education, it's realistic, but it's also really sad. It shows how we don't invest in our young people, especially the ones who need it the most.
And it makes you think, if we want to fix those big problems, the crime, the inequality, we need to start with the schools, how we teach our kids, how we support our teachers, how we build a society that values everyone, not just the wealthy ones.
Now, we talked about the story, the visuals, but we can't forget the music. The Wire, it doesn't just use music as background, it's woven into the whole story. It sets the mood, helps develop the characters, emphasizes those themes.
It's true. The music, it's more than just a soundtrack, it's part of the storytelling itself.
And there's such a mix. Hip hop, soul, blues, even that traditional Baltimore sound. And every song, it's chosen carefully to make you feel something, to highlight something in the story.
Like that scene with Randy Wagstaff, trying to get out of the game, remember. He's listening to that gospel song, The Blind Boys of Alabama. It's about hope, redemption. And it fits perfectly with what he wants, that better life. To escape the violence, the despair.
Yeah, music can be so powerful, right? It shows you what's going on inside.
And that theme song, Way Down on the Hole, but Tom Waits. So haunting. Those lyrics about sin, redemption, trying to climb out of that hole, it captures the whole show, I think.
And all those different versions they use, different artists, different styles, it reflects all those different voices, those different viewpoints in The Wire.
Genius. Using music to create a feeling of place, the mood, those themes.
Now, we should talk about The Wire's legacy, how it's impacted our culture. Even though the ratings weren't that great when it was on, it's become this phenomenon.
It has. Critics love it, academics study it, it's got fans all over the world. And it changed television, I think. It opened the door for other shows that are more complex, more nuanced, shows that deal with real issues, that try new ways of telling stories.
And even though it ended years ago, it's still relevant. Those themes, poverty, inequality, the corruption, the war on drugs failing, those things still resonate. The world can feel just as bleak as those streets in Baltimore.
The Wire started conversations, articles, books, even policy changes. And it keeps going. As more people discover it, it becomes even more important.
It's a show that deserves to be watched, talked about, debated for years to come, and it's not all bleak either. In the end, it gives you a sense of hope.
That hope comes from believing that even when things are bad, even when it seems like the game's rigged, we can still try. We can still make a difference.
Now let's talk about the structure of The Wire, how it tells this story. It's so complex, so many layers, 5 seasons weaving together all those storylines, all those characters. It's this huge tapestry, so expansive, so detailed.
People call it a novel for television. And I think that fits. It's got the ambition of a great novel, but it's also got that immediacy, that emotional punch that television can give you.
Yeah, the creators, they're so good at connecting these stories that seem separate. Like you'll be watching the police working a case, and then suddenly you're in a classroom.
It's jarring at first, but as you watch, you realize those worlds are connected. The politicians, the police, the teachers, the students, they're all part of this big web. Everything affects everything else.
And the characters themselves, their lives intertwine in these unexpected ways. Sometimes it leads to tragedy, sometimes it changes their life completely.
It all goes back to that idea everything is connected. The Wire really shows you that.
And the show does a great job of showing you the moral dilemmas that come with these institutions. Even the people who want to do good can be corrupted by the system.
Like McNulty, right. He's passionate about justice, But he's also reckless, willing to break the rules. And those actions, they have consequences for him and for everyone around him.
Yeah, they can really backfire. And it's not just him. You see other cops, too. Compromising their values, making deals with the bad guys, ignoring injustice. All to get ahead, to protect themselves.
It makes you think, right? How easily good intentions can get twisted when you're in a system like that. And it's not just the police. You see in politics, too. People come in wanting to change things, but then the power gets to them.
Yeah, all the perks. They start making compromises, cutting deals, and pretty soon it's all about staying in office. The people they're supposed to be serving, they come second.
It's cynical, but it's hard to argue with. That's how it works. And the schools, too. They're underfunded, overcrowded. They can't even give the kids the basics.
The teachers, they're burnt out. The system, it just chews them up and spits them out. And the students, they're trapped. No hope for anything better.
It's tough to watch.
Yeah.
The show really shows you how society fails these kids. Over and over. Makes you wonder, can anything really change?
It's a big question. The show asks it a lot. And there's no easy answer. But I think it's saying that change, it is possible. But it takes everyone working together. We have to face those hard truths. And we have to be willing to invest in our communities and our young people.
It's a lot to process. The Wire, it doesn't let you off easy. It makes you confront these uncomfortable truths about the world. It makes you think about your own role in it all.
Now, I think we should talk about the ending. The way The Wire ends, it's fitting, but it's also unsettling. It shows you how cyclical things are. These systems, they're so hard to change. The game, it's rigged. You see characters like Dookie, that young kid who reminds you of Wallace, and he's just sinking deeper into despair. And McNulty, even though he tries so hard, he can't really break the cycle.
It's a tough pill to swallow. Even when you want to do the right thing, even when you try your best, it's so hard to overcome these huge systemic problems.
Right. But there are glimmers of hope, too, like Buttles. He manages to beat his addiction. He finds some peace, some redemption. And Michael, that young guy who got sucked into the drug trade, he finds a way forward, even if it's not the most ethical path.
It's a complicated ending. It doesn't tie everything up neatly. It leaves you with this feeling of unease, like the fight for justice, for equality. It's never over.
Exactly. But there's hope, too. That belief that even when things are bad, people can still endure and change. Even if it's slow, it's still possible.
It's an ending that stays with you. It makes you think about how complex the world is.
Yeah.
And it challenges you. What's your role in all of this? How can you make things better?
And that's the power of The Wire. It's not just entertainment. It makes you think, it makes you question things, it makes you want to do something. It challenges us to think critically, to question what we believe, and to understand that our actions have consequences.
It reminds us that we're all connected. Our choices matter. And that even when things seem hopeless, the human spirit is strong. If you're looking for something to listen to while you think about all of this, check out Way Down in the Hole by Tom Waits. It's a haunting song. Really captures the mood of The Wire.